Hello, dear friends. Today we have Konstantin Bondarenko as our guest. It's been almost 2 weeks since we last saw each other. That's a really long time. I already missed you. So, how are we living, according to the news? You know, it's like living on a volcano. Something's always happening. I mean, I don't think there's ever been anything like this in human history. Such a smoldering volcano, right?
Yeah, well, summer usually isn't rich in news, but if something does happen, it's always something bright and memorable. Yes,
Yeah. Konstantin, tell me, after the recent massive drone strike on Russia, can we talk about a strategic failure of Russia's air defense and intelligence, since they're allowing these kinds of raids to happen?
well, actually, this question comes up repeatedly in Russia. After every successful raid by Ukraine, people say that, well, the air defense isn't coping, that Russia can't fulfill the tasks it faces today. But as for what happens next, there is then an exchange of strikes. In response, Russia sends a huge number, hundreds of drones, into Ukrainian territory. And then, in Ukraine, people start saying that the Ukrainian air defense isn't coping and begin to criticize the Ukrainian air defense. What both sides have demonstrated is that this new war, essentially, the new war that both Russia and Ukraine have had to face, is, first and foremost, a drone war. They were not prepared for this kind of war. Both Russia and Ukraine were preparing for a completely different type of conflict. And they simply had to retrain and adapt on the fly, which is a major problem. And, well, now the question is who will be more active and more successful in dealing with the challenges that the war has presented.
Do you think that drones are the new artillery of the poor? And can they change the rules of warfare in the 21st century?
It can change the rules of war, but to say that it's the new artillery of the poor, it's effective. This technology is effective. But to call it the artillery of the poor, yes, it's cheaper to produce, operate, and control. But at the same time, it's hardly a matter of poverty. It's really about investing resources effectively in combat objectives.
What do you think? How much do such strikes demoralize the Russian population and regional elites?
I wouldn't say that there's a certain demoralization happening, because demoralization should have some clear signs. Demoralization should result in some kind of protest sentiment, which, even if it doesn't show up in the squares or on the streets, should at least be reflected in sociological indicators, in opinion polls. Demoralization usually leads to a certain confrontation between society and the authorities. None of this is happening in Russia.
Look, after the latest strikes, something interesting happened in Russia. The Minister of Transport was dismissed over this. He committed suicide, and a new Minister of Transport was appointed. And I just can't understand. What does the Minister of Transport have to do with this? He isn't responsible for these drones.
In reality, these things aren't connected. And regarding the Minister of Transport and the former governor, investigations have begun. Investigations into cases related to his time as governor of the Kursk region, the construction of fortifications, and abuses connected to that. And it is believed, well, according to the official, semi-official version, that this was the reason for the suicide, that corruption was uncovered, and this led to Starovoyt's death. As for the Minister of Transport, it's simply that he took over the ministry and, well, let's not talk about the fact that he didn't have either the time or the opportunity to prove himself in this position. So here, it wasn't his attitude toward the Ministry of Transport or his management of the ministry that played a role, but rather an older story.
What do you think? Was it really a suicide, or was he simply eliminated because he was under threat? Remember, just recently, a large number of top managers in the oil industry accidentally fell out of windows.
Yes, but actually, if you look at over the past 10 years, I saw a list of those who fell out of windows and so on, and as my Russian colleagues and experts point out, most of these kinds of victims appeared during the intense standoff and competition between Rosneft and Gazprom. And it was specifically representatives of these agencies, the energy agencies, who most often became victims. That's why people there talk about possible eliminations, settling of scores, and so on. But when it comes to political murders or, say, suicides, well, first of all, they're very hard to prove. Obviously, the official version is always suicide, accidental death, or some other explanation. And no one ever says what really happened to the person. There are always a lot of insinuations. The higher a person's position, the harder it is for them to die.
Just like in America, everyone who wanted to testify against Bill Clinton accidentally self-destructed.
Same in Ukraine.
One drowned, another fell on a knife 8 times, a third did something else. They all self-destructed, probably about 20 people or so self-destructed.
In Ukraine, in its history, there was the suicide of the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Internal Affairs, 2 heads of the State Property Fund, and so on. Many.
Cases like that, yeah. And the last political murder was Epstein, because people saw Madame Klitschko near the prison, and he accidentally hanged himself in his cell. In such a super secure cell, he somehow accidentally hanged himself.
Yeah, right.
Self-liquidated. Okay, let's get back to Ukraine and Russia. Please tell me, how much longer can Ukraine continue the war without mass mobilization, especially as Western aid decreases? They don't really have, well, there is some mobilization, but it's not like, back in 41 to 44 when everyone went to fight, when the whole country joined in. How long can this go on?
The Ukrainian leadership has not managed to convince the citizens of their country that the current war is a patriotic one. At first, yes, a lot of Ukrainian citizens showed a sense of responsibility. There were kilometer-long lines at the military enlistment offices. People were voluntarily going to war. But at a certain point, a certain principle kicked in, which was once described by John Kennedy's former press secretary, Schlesinger, with the words, "Any war is popular for the first 30 days." And then, then interest in the war starts to decline. And as for this particular situation, that's exactly what Ukraine has demonstrated. After November 2022, the Ukrainian forces have not managed to achieve any significant success. I'm not talking about adventures like the Kursk adventure. I mean actually reclaiming part of the territory, a significant part of the territory, or carrying out counteroffensive actions. They haven't succeeded. And this leads to demoralization. It leads to a certain internal dissatisfaction. So, some people are starting to think that this war is just a slaughter, that it needs to end already, that it's time to put a stop to it. Well, we've lost territories. Let's admit that we've lost territories. Continuing the war just means further loss of territory and people. And as for the situation with Ukraine, right now you can announce new waves of mobilization and so on, but every mobilization also requires technical support. And if the United States suddenly decides that it can't provide assistance at the same level as it did in 2022, 2023, and 2024, if they decide to let European countries provide the aid and those European countries start shifting responsibility onto each other, then you could mobilize another 1 million people. But what are you going to arm them with? As our former Foreign Minister Kuleba said, with shovels. Well, again, that's the question.
There was a time during World War II when they went with shovels, remember?
Yes. And during World War I, there were times when a soldier would sit and wait for his comrade to be killed so he could take his rifle and keep fighting. But that's just not right.
Yeah, true. Do you think there is any actual strategy regarding Ukraine, or has it all just come down to tactics after things dragged on?
I think that at some point, when the initial strategy didn't work, they decided to focus on tactical successes instead. So, the idea became to achieve the maximum possible tactical gains, and the sum of those gains would serve as a substitute for a real strategy.
Look, as far as I understand, we're already approaching 5 years of war. It's going to be soon, right?
No, it's only been 3.5 so far. Just 3.5.
3.5. But still, that's a long time. How much longer can this inertia last? Another year, another 5 years, or could it just drag on forever?
Well, actually, the issue could be resolved very suddenly. Just as the war started suddenly, the issue of stopping it could be resolved just as suddenly. Because the question of achieving peace between Russia and Ukraine isn't really about negotiations between Ukraine and Russia or talks between Zelensky and Putin. It's a matter, on the one hand, of negotiations between Putin and Trump, and on the other, of Trump's talks with his European colleagues. When the West reaches a consensus among themselves, when they agree on whether to continue the war or to stop it, and when the terms for ending the confrontation between the West and Russia are also settled, then Ukraine will simply be informed of the collective decision of the Western countries that, starting from tomorrow, let's say at 11 p.m., hostilities will cease.
But look, as I understand it, Trump is really not. He doesn't like talking to Putin. He's very dissatisfied, but at the same time he thinks, Putin is my buddy, my friend, we'll work something out. But some kind of agreements just aren't happening. Putin isn't making any deals with Trump, but at the same time, he's not putting on any pressure or making any sudden moves either. He says something, but as for any sudden moves, he doesn't actually do anything. Why is that happening?
The thing is, Trump is unhappy with the last conversation. It's not that he's unhappy with the whole negotiation process between Russia and the United States. He's specifically unhappy with the last conversation. And he understands that this conversation isn't the last one between them, that nothing has been finalized, that in 2 weeks they'll talk again, and maybe the next conversation will be more pleasant. He reacted to a specific action, to a specific incident. That's it. As for everything else, let's just say that's something that can be worked out over time. The process is ongoing.
Okay, let's get back to Donald Trump. As far as I understand, Donald Trump issued some kind of ultimatum to the BRICS countries today. He wrote an open letter. He said he's raising tariffs. So, in your opinion, BRICS is expanding, but it's weakly integrated. Is it an alternative to the West, or just a political club?
No, it's more of a political and economic club. Because strict integration is not provided for there. For example, in the European Union or NATO, these are different categories, different spheres, but there is a certain strict integration there with its own charter, its own internal sanctions, and other such things. So BRICS is more like a club of shared interests. It's a club for those dissatisfied with the dominance of the United States in the world. That's exactly how BRICS was originally formed.
Tell me, could new tariff wars between the US, China, the US, and the EU lead to the collapse of the entire global market and the breakup of BRICS?
It's possible, and many economists are talking about this. They say that this kind of political confrontation can lead to irreversible economic processes. Because any economic crisis in the 20th and early 21st centuries was resolved by regulating certain relationships that existed within the global market environment. But if it actually turns into a struggle where everyone is acting for themselves without any common rules, and where countries are basically acting out of spite toward each other, then this can only make the situation worse for many states.
So who really dominates BRICS? China, India, or is it still the US indirectly through its trade?
Well, I think that, in principle, each country can play its own game, because to say who will benefit the most, or lose the most, or who is most afraid of a crisis right now, it's hard to say. Each one believes that they are prepared, unlike their opponents or competitors, ready for a crisis, subconsciously understanding that there are some rules, but absolutely unprepared to exist in a situation of a no-rules war.
Can Russia really integrate into China's economy, or is it destined to be just a raw materials appendage?
Well, look, the thing is, Russia doesn't set that goal for itself. It fully understands that, compared to China's economy, the Russian economy is, let's say, quite a small player. As for Russia, from China's point of view, China is primarily interested in Russia as a political actor. specifically as a political entity, as a certain state that can play a role, and does play the role of a trigger in relations with the West. Russia is disrupting the Western architecture that was created not only after World War II, but also after the Cold War. Russia is working to dismantle this architecture. China is completely fine with that.
Okay, let's get back to Donald Trump and talk about him. How long has it been now? It's been half a year. Yeah, November, right. So it's been quite a while since Trump returned to the White House. What has actually changed in world politics? What real steps has Trump taken regarding Ukraine? Is he aiming for peace, a freeze, or a secret deal with the Kremlin?
So far, Trump is negotiating with Russia. Ukraine is one of the points of contact in negotiations with Russia. But besides that, there are also issues concerning the Arctic, nuclear weapons, nuclear arms control, conventional arms control, matters related to the Pacific Ocean, and so on. You could list a huge number of issues that are important for resolving matters between the United States and Russia. And you can't say that only the Ukrainian issue defines the relationship between Moscow and Washington. As for what Trump managed to achieve, well, there are really only two things. The first is actual clarity in the conflict that existed around Congo. That's it. And the second is the victory over Iran. That's it.
Let's focus on that now. Yes.
Yes, both events, let's put it that way, are rather conditional in nature, but it's enough for Trump to lay claim to the Nobel Prize. And if he manages to resolve the issue with Ukraine, I think he'll be aiming to have his face carved on Mount Rushmore.
How much has aid to Ukraine actually changed under Trump? Can we say that the US is abandoning Kiev? As far as I understand, there's a personal dislike for Zelensky, and that's where it all starts. Trump, in general, acts based on personal dislike or apathy, or not apathy. He either likes a person or he doesn't. So how does this affect aid to Ukraine?
Well, look, Trump doesn't consider Zelensky his equal. He doesn't see him as someone he should feel any emotions toward. Yeah, an unpleasant person. Yes, it's unpleasant to deal with him, but there are political interests, and he believes that since there are political interests and he's the president of a great country, he has to, from time to time, set aside his likes or dislikes. That's it. As for the aid, it was determined earlier, so, accordingly, aid to Ukraine is not so much a political issue as it is a matter that will determine the alignment of business interests around Trump. Previously, the U.S. military-industrial complex was interested in cooperating with the Democrats because the Democrats, due to the war in Ukraine, ensured a flow of new orders for the military-industrial complex. Now, if Trump manages to make a deal with the leading companies, many of the top companies in this field, and win them over to his side, they too will get their contracts, their orders. And Ukraine will receive some kind of aid from the United States. The only question is whether this will be the kind of aid that Ukraine is expecting. For example, today it became known that Trump has already unfrozen aid to Ukraine, and Ukraine will receive as many as 10 missiles for intercepting aerial targets.
10 missiles.
10 missiles for the systems.
For 10 minutes. 10 minutes of fighting.
Yes. So, 10 missiles, that's the first thing. And Zelensky also asked, at least give us the 30 missiles that are on Polish territory. But Trump said, we'll see. We need to count for ourselves what we have in our reserves, how much we have left, and what we can help with.
Okay, let's get back to Iran. Tucker Carlson interviewed the president of Iran. That happened. And the president of Iran basically says that they don't want to fight with America, they want peace, they want to negotiate. But at the same time, he accuses America of not fulfilling its obligations and says that during the negotiations, the United States gave Israel permission to attack Iran. What do you think? Did America really give Israel permission? Or did Netanyahu try to drag Trump into this situation? Did he go and do all this on his own? And in general, how do you assess this war? Because Iran says that they won. They're celebrating, even though 30 generals were killed there. Israeli planes were just flying in the sky there like they were at home. Yes, there were losses in Israel too. They didn't expect such a strike. Their air defense, which is one of the best in the world, immediately let some missiles through, that's clear. But still, how do you personally assess this war? Did Israel achieve what it wanted?
Well, honestly, I think that even if Trump had said no, Netanyahu would have started this conflict. In other words, it was necessary, politically necessary, for Netanyahu. That's clear. But at a certain point, the United States realized they could get some benefits, gain some bonuses from this conflict. And they basically supported Israel. As for who won, each side chalked up a victory for themselves. In other words, each side came out with their own justifications for why they, supposedly, were the winners. Israel said, "Our victory is that we exposed the vulnerability of the Iranian leadership," and so on. Although, as it turned out, about half of those 30 generals were actually still alive.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard that.
Yes, it was announced they had died, but then it turned out they miraculously survived. Obviously, in the current situation, this was also tested in Ukraine. In 2022, it seemed almost daily there were reports a Russian general had been killed and now another Russian general eliminated. Then it turned out that all of them were absolutely alive. There you go. So that's that. And, well, this is also a technique, a modern technique that's used in modern warfare. Propaganda, yes, basically. As for the situation itself, I think this is an ellipsis, that the problems in this region are far from resolved, and unfortunately, Iran and Israel will face moments of escalation, unfortunately, in the not so distant future.
I see. Okay. And there's something else I'd like to ask. When America struck the bunker, that whole flashy show with the embroidery, they were in open skies for 36 hours. But honestly, what was that all about? What was Trump trying to show? He was trying to show his power to China and Russia, like, look at our strength, don't mess with us. Or was it actually some kind of agreement, and the Iranians were allowed to take out all the enriched uranium, and basically, everything was fine there? What do you think?
Well, actually, there are sources that say Iran was warned about the strike, and they managed to remove some of the equipment and some of the enriched uranium in time. I don't know how true that is. Only experts can really assess that. As for Trump, he wanted to show the world, basically, that we are stronger than ever. The United States is ready to strike anywhere in the world and defend its interests. And it was also necessary to show the average American, every ordinary American, that they aren't paying taxes for nothing, and that thanks to their taxes, the United States defense capability is at a high level.
Okay, and, well, for the last topic today, I saved the juiciest for last. Elon Musk and Donald Trump have gotten into another argument. What's going on? There are rumors going around that they're almost about to deport him back to South Africa, to his home. He's trying to create a new party. We understand what we're pushing for here. But in America, according to its constitution, he won't be able to get a new party. People have already tried. It's pointless. Back in the days of George Bush, there was a guy, can't even remember who tried to create one. He took a few thousand votes away from the Democrats, and that's why Bush won instead of Gore. But it's practically impossible. Why did Musk, such a close friend of Trump, spend the night at his place in Florida? And Trump was practically holding his son in his arms there. The main thing is, they suddenly had a huge falling out and now they're basically attacking each other. Or is this some kind of arrangement just to help Musk boost his company's stock again? What's going on? What do you think?
I think that, well, first of all, there really is a conflict between two egocentrics. Two egocentric figures who, well, at some point their interests diverged, and now they're trying to prove to each other who's who, basically. That's the first thing. Second point. I think Musk isn't as simple as many people believe, and that his actions may have far reaching goals, which for now are just disguised as the creation of a new party, an American party. And it's quite possible that he might be preparing to play a certain role in future political processes, betting on someone from those who will come after Trump. I wouldn't be surprised if what's happening now is simply the preparation for Jody Vance's election campaign.
But what exactly do you truly think? What powerful forces are truly behind Elon Musk and those who are backing him?
Well, the forces right now, the politicians who have declared their support for Musk, I don't think they should be considered serious or influential forces. He doesn't have any prominent figures who could act as his stand-ins. He himself, for example, can't run for president because he wasn't born in the United States, so in this situation, he's most likely preparing for some new political project. As for the forces connected to him, how closely the Silicon Valley kings or certain influential billionaires are tied to him, that, I think, is something Americans themselves could answer better.
And what do you think? Does America's future lie with Gigi Vance or DeSantis?
I think that for now, well, there's still a lot of time, and many different things could happen. We live in such an unpredictable time. But if the elections were held today, I think Gigi Vance would have a better chance.
And the last question for today, I want to ask about Zelensky. How has the world's attitude towards Zelensky changed? I remember how everyone greeted him there. Everyone was patting him on the back, from kings to presidents, shaking his hand. Is he still in that position now, or is he already someone people avoid shaking hands with?
It's not that people are actively avoiding shaking his hand, but the undeniable thing is, President Zelensky is now supported by only a very few international leaders. These are German Chancellor Merz, UK Prime Minister Starmer, and, accordingly, French President Macron. However, now there's a certain chill in relations with Macron after Macron's call to Putin. As for Merz, he is now coming to the forefront. Zelensky has lost many friends in Eastern Europe. Already Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary are not as, well, Hungary wasn't very supportive from the start, not as welcoming to Zelensky anymore. The visit to Austria was quite telling. Zelensky was given a very grand reception, 33 cars in the motorcade, 16 motorcycles, 3 helicopters. The historic center of Vienna, was cordoned off. 700 police officers.
2 imported tape recorders.
Yes, that's how it is. But at the same time, on every point Zelensky raised with Austrian leadership, he got the no.
That's what we need to talk about. Yes, people are welcomed. What matters is how they're seen off.
Exactly. So that's exactly.
What do you think? I know this might be an inappropriate question, but is Zelensky basically a doomed man? Does Zelensky even have a future? It seems to me his future doesn't look very bright.
I honestly don't know. But the thing is, people like him either end up as victims of coups, or they manage to leave in time to write their memoirs.
Memoirs, if there's a place left for him to write them. Okay. Thank you very much for coming today to answer our questions. I hope I didn't wear you out too much, and see you next time.
Thank you, and until we meet again.
Goodbye, everyone.